Good morning, boys and girls. Today we have a great story. It's called A Bad Case of Stripes by David Shannon. Let's see what happens. Camilla Cream loved Lima Beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated Lima Beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camilla was always worried about what other people thought of her. Today she was fretting more than usual. It was the first day of school and she couldn't decide what to wear. There were so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits, but none seemed quite right. She put on a pretty red dress and looked in the mirror. Her mother ran into the room and she screamed too. "Oh my heavens," she cried. "You're completely covered with stripes." That was certainly true. Camilla was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camilla's forehead. "Do you feel all right?" "I feel fine," Camilla answered. "But just look at me." "You get back in bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You are not going to school today." Camilla was relieved. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid of what the other kids would say. And she had no idea what to wear with those crazy stripes. That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine Camilla. "Most extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it. Are you having coughing, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching?" "No," Camilla told him. "I feel fine." "Well then," Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, "I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's some ointment that should help clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to reach me." And off he went. "Even her tongue is striped." The next day was a disaster. Everyone at school laughed at Camilla. They called her Camilla Crayon and Night of the Living Lollipop. She tried her best to act as if everything were normal. But when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned red, white, and blue, and she broke out in stars. The other kids thought this was great. One yelled out, "Let's see some purple polka dots." Sure enough, Camilla turned all purple polka dotty. Someone else shouted, "Checkerboard!" and a pattern of squares covered her skin. Soon everyone was calling out different colors and shapes, and poor Camilla was changing colors faster than you can change the channel on your TV. That night, Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cream," he said. "I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camilla home from school. She's just too much of a distraction. And I've been getting calls from other parents. They're afraid those stripes might be contagious." Camilla was so embarrassed. She couldn't believe that 2 days ago everyone liked her. Now, nobody wanted to be in the same room with her. Her father tried to make her feel better. "Is there anything I can get, sweetheart?" he asked. "No, thank you," sighed Camilla. What she really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans, but she had been laughed at enough already.
Well, yes, I see, Dr. Bumble mumbled when Mr. Cream phoned the next day. I think I'd better bring in the specialist. We'll be right over.
An hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with 4 people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams.
This is Dr. Gop, Dr. Sponge, Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young.
Then the specialist went to work on Camilla. They squeezed and jabbed and tapped and tested. It was very uncomfortable. Well, it's not the mumps, concluded Dr. Grop. Or the measles, said Dr. Sponge. Definitely not chicken pox, put in Dr. Cricket.
Or sunburn,
said Dr. Young.
Try these,
said the specialist. They each handed her a bottle filled with different colored pills. Take one of each before going to bed. They filed out the door, followed by Dr. Bumble. Poor Camilla. That night, Camilla took her medicine. It was awful. When she woke up the next morning, she did feel different. But when she got dressed, her clothes didn't feel right. When she looked in the mirror, there, staring back at her, was a giant pill with her face on it. Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Mrs. Cream called. But this time, instead of the specialist, he brought the experts. Dr. Gord and Dr. Mellon were the finest scientific minds in the land. Once again, poor Camilla was poked and prodded, looked at and listened to. The experts wrote down lots of numbers. Then they huddled together and whispered. Dr. Gord finally spoke. It might be a virus, he announced with authority. Suddenly, fuzzy little virus balls popped out all over Camilla. Or possibly some form of bacteria, said Dr. Mellon. Out popped squiggly little bacteria tails. Or it could be a fungus, added Dr. Gord. Instantly, Camilla was covered with different colored fungus blotches. The experts looked at Camilla and then at each other. We need to get these numbers back to the lab, Dr. Gord explained. We will call you when we know something. But the experts did not have a clue, much less a cure. Poor Camilla. By now, the TV news had found out about Camilla. Reporters from every channel were outside her house, telling the story of the bizarre case of the incredible changing kid. Soon, a large crowd was camped out on their front lawn. The Creams were swamped with all kinds of remedies, from psychologists, allergists, herbalists, nutritionists, psychics, an old medicine man, a guru, and even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added to poor Camilla's strange appearance, until it was hard to even recognize her. She sprouted roots and berries and crystals and feathers and a long furry tail. But nothing worked. What do you think's going to happen? One day, a woman who called herself an environmental therapist claimed she could cure Camilla. Close your eyes, she said. Breathe deeply and be one with the room. I wish you hadn't said that, groaned Camilla. Slowly, she started to melt into the walls of her room. Her bed became her mouth. Her nose was a dresser, and 2 paintings were her eyes. The therapist screamed and ran from the house. "What are we going to do?" sobbed Mrs. Cream. "It just keeps getting worse and worse." At that moment, Mr. Cream heard a quiet little knock at the front door. He opened it, and there stood a little old woman who was sweet and plump as a strawberry. "Excuse me," she said brightly, "but I think I can help." She went into Camilla's room and looked around. "My goodness," she said with a shake of her head. "What we have here is a bad case of stripes, one of the worst I've ever seen." She pulled a small container of green beans from her bag. "Here," she said, "these might do the trick." "Are those magic beans?" asked Mrs. Cream. "Oh, my, no," replied the old woman. "There's no such thing. These are just plain old Lima beans. I bet you'd like some, wouldn't you?" she asked Camilla. "Yuck," she said. "No one likes Lima beans, especially me." "Oh, dear," said the woman sadly. "I guess I was wrong about you." She put the beans back in her bag and started toward the door. Camilla watched the old woman walk away. Those beans would taste so good. And being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she'd been going through. She finally couldn't stand it. "Wait!" she cried. "The truth is, I really love Lima beans." "I thought so," said the woman with a smile. She took a handful of them and popped them in Camilla's mouth. Said Camilla. Suddenly, the branches and the feathers and the squiggly tails began to disappear. Then the whole room swirled around. When it stopped, there stood Camilla. Everything was back to normal. "I'm cured," she shouted. "Yes," said the old woman. "I knew the real you was in there somewhere." She patted Camilla on the head. Then she went outside and vanished into the crowd. Afterward, Camilla wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at school said she was weird. She didn't care one bit. She ate all the lima beans she wanted, and she never even had a touch of stripes again. What do you think Camilla learned from her experience with the stripes? I think she learned that she just needed to be herself. That's what we all need to do, isn't it? I hope you enjoyed our story today. Come see us at the library. It's summer reading time. Have a great Friday.